The roar inside Madison Square Garden on the evening of June 10, 1972, was unlike anything New York had ever heard. Nearly 20,000 people had packed every seat in the arena. The lights dimmed, conversations dissolved into anticipation, and suddenly the unmistakable introduction thundered through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis Presley." The crowd exploded. Fans leaped to their feet before they even saw him. Then he appeared. Wearing the legendary white jumpsuit decorated with golden eagle embroidery, a crimson scarf hanging from his neck, and a confident smile that had captivated millions around the world, Elvis walked onto the stage as if he carried the electricity of the entire building with him. The applause became deafening. Some people cried before he even sang the first note. Others simply stood frozen, unable to believe they were finally seeing the king perform live. Elvis nodded toward the audience. "Thank you very much." His familiar southern drawl immediately earned another wave of cheers. The orchestra burst into "Also sprach Zarathustra," followed by "That's all right." Within seconds, every person in the arena understood they were witnessing something unforgettable. But none of them realized that history would remember this night for a reason completely different from the music. Several hours before the concert, outside Madison Square Garden, the streets buzzed with excitement. Taxi horns echoed between skyscrapers. Vendors sold Elvis posters, buttons, and souvenir programs. Thousands of fans waited patiently in long lines stretching around the building. Among them sat a little boy in a wheelchair. His name was Daniel Harper. He was only 8 years old. A pale blue bandana covered his head where chemotherapy had taken his hair. His oversized black jacket hung loosely from his tiny shoulders, making him appear even smaller than he already was. His mother, Margaret, gently adjusted the blanket covering his legs. "You cold, sweetheart?" Daniel smiled. "No, Mom." His voice was soft, almost fragile. Margaret forced a smile. She had practiced that smile for months, ever since doctors had delivered the words no parent should ever hear. "Stage 4. Nothing more we can do. Prepare for the time you have left." She remembered collapsing in the hospital hallway while Daniel quietly comforted her instead. "It's okay, Mommy." No child should ever have to say those words. Yet Daniel had, again and again. Despite everything, he never complained, never asked why, never blamed anyone. Instead, he spent most of his days listening to Elvis records on a small portable player beside his hospital bed. The nurses all knew his favorite songs: "Love Me Tender," "How Great Thou Art," "Peace in the Valley." Whenever Elvis sang, Daniel seemed to forget the pain, even if only for 3 minutes. 3 months earlier, a volunteer at the children's hospital had asked Daniel an innocent question. If you could meet anyone in the whole world, who would it be? He didn't hesitate. "Elvis." The nurse laughed softly. "I suppose everyone wants to meet Elvis." Daniel shook his head. "I don't need to meet him." "No? I just want him to know he helped me stop being scared." Those words stayed with the nurse. She wrote them in Daniel's medical chart, not because they were medically important, because they were beautiful. Margaret had spent nearly every dollar she owned to buy 2 tickets. Friends told her she was being irresponsible. "You'll need that money." She knew they were right. But she also knew something else. Memories could last longer than money. And if this truly became Daniel's last summer, she wanted him to have one perfect night. Inside the arena, security guards noticed the wheelchair almost immediately. One of them approached kindly. "Ma'am, let me help you." Within minutes, they were escorted to a special location near the front of the stage. Margaret couldn't believe their luck. Daniel stared at the microphone, standing only a short distance away. "So close," he whispered. "I can actually see where he'll stand." His eyes sparkled with excitement. For the first time in weeks, he looked like an ordinary little boy, not a patient, not someone living on borrowed time, just a child waiting for his hero. Backstage, Elvis stood before a mirror while Charlie Hodge adjusted his scarves. "You ready, E?" Elvis grinned. "As ready as I'll ever be." He rolled his shoulders. Concert nights had become routine, yet every audience felt different. Every city carried its own heartbeat. New York always demanded everything, and Elvis always intended to give it. Before walking toward the stage, he paused. He quietly bowed his head. Not many people knew he still prayed before almost every performance. His mother had taught him that. "Lord, help me make somebody's night better. Amen." Then he walked toward history. The concert unfolded flawlessly. "Hound Dog," "Proud Mary," "Never Been to Spain." Each song raised the energy higher. Women rushed toward the stage. Scarves flew through the air. Security struggled to hold excited fans back. Elvis laughed, smiled, joked with the audience. "You folks having a good time tonight?" The answer nearly shook the ceiling. Daniel clapped after every song, even when his hands trembled from exhaustion. Margaret occasionally looked down at him. She noticed something worrying. He seemed increasingly tired. His breathing had become shallow. "You okay?" He nodded. "I don't want to leave." "We don't have to." "I'll be okay." She gently squeezed his hand. Inside, her heart was breaking. Halfway through the concert, during a short pause between songs, Elvis reached for a bottle of water. As the audience continued cheering, his eyes wandered across the first few rows. He often did this. He enjoyed watching people's reactions. Young couples, military veterans, children sitting on their parents' shoulders, elderly fans smiling like teenagers. Then, his eyes stopped. A tiny figure, blue bandana, wheelchair, watching him with complete admiration, not screaming, not waving, simply smiling, a quiet, unforgettable smile. Elvis stared for a second longer than usual. Something about the boy reminded him of another child, his own daughter, Lisa Marie. The thought lingered. Charlie noticed. "What is it?" Elvis quietly pointed. "The little fella." Charlie looked. "I see him." Elvis nodded slowly. "Keep an eye on him." Charlie wasn't sure why, but he trusted Elvis's instincts. The next song began. Yet Elvis found himself glancing toward the wheelchair again and again. Each time, the little boy was still smiling, still singing every lyric, word for word, despite clearly struggling to stay awake. Something about that determination settled deep inside Elvis's heart. He couldn't explain it. He only knew this night was changing. And somewhere, beyond the bright stage lights, fate was preparing a moment that no one inside Madison Square Garden would ever forget. The applause continued rolling through Madison Square Garden like distant thunder. Every song seemed louder than the one before. Every smile on Elvis's face made the audience cheer even harder. Yet behind the confident performer, something had quietly changed. His attention kept returning to the same place, the little boy in the wheelchair. It wasn't unusual for Elvis to notice fans. He often spotted soldiers in uniform, children holding handmade signs, or elderly couples dancing together during slower songs. But this felt different. The boy wasn't trying to get noticed. He wasn't waving. He wasn't crying. He simply watched Elvis as though every second mattered, as though he were trying to memorize every movement, every smile, every word. Elvis couldn't explain why, but the child's expression stayed in his mind. The orchestra began the opening notes of "You Gave Me a Mountain." It was one of the most emotional songs in Elvis's live performances. As he sang about carrying unbearable burdens, the lyrics suddenly felt more personal than ever. He glanced toward the front row. Daniel was singing every word. His voice couldn't possibly reach the stage over the thousands of fans. Yet Elvis could almost read the lyrics from the movement of the boy's lips. The child knew every line, every pause, every breath. When the final note echoed through the arena, Daniel quietly closed his eyes for a moment. He looked exhausted. Margaret immediately leaned toward him. "Do you need to rest?" Daniel slowly shook his head. "No, you don't look well. I promised myself I'd stay until the end." Margaret gently touched his forehead. It felt warmer than before. She looked toward the medical volunteers standing near the aisle. One of them noticed her concern and slowly walked over. "Is everything all right?" Margaret lowered her voice. "He gets tired very quickly." The volunteer knelt beside Daniel. "Would you like to go somewhere quieter for a few minutes?" Daniel smiled politely. "No, thank you. I'll be okay." He looked back toward the stage. "I've waited my whole life for this." Those simple words left the volunteer speechless. Backstage, during a brief instrumental break, Charlie Hodge leaned toward Elvis. "You've looked over there half a dozen times." Elvis didn't deny it. "Something tells me that little boy shouldn't be here." Charlie frowned. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. He looks sick." Charlie quietly nodded. "I noticed the wheelchair." Elvis took a slow drink of water. "After this next number," he paused, "I want you to find out who he is." Charlie looked surprised. "Now?" "Now." No further explanation was needed. Charlie slipped away behind the curtain. A member of the security team guided him toward the front of the stage. Margaret immediately looked nervous. "Is something wrong?" Charlie smiled warmly. "Not at all. My name is Charlie. I work with Elvis." Daniel's eyes widened. "With Elvis?" Charlie laughed softly. "Every night." Daniel stared at him as though he had just met someone from another world. Charlie crouched beside the wheelchair. "Can I ask your name?" "I'm Daniel." "And who's this beautiful lady?" "My mom." Margaret smiled. "I'm Margaret." Charlie noticed how tired Daniel looked. His hands were unusually pale. There were tiny bruises near the IV marks on his arm. Charlie had seen enough hospitals during charity visits to recognize what chemotherapy often did to children. His smile faded. "What brings you here tonight, Daniel?" The little boy answered without hesitation. "I wanted to hear Elvis sing before—" He suddenly stopped speaking. Charlie waited patiently. Margaret looked down. Tears had already begun filling her eyes. Daniel finished the sentence quietly. "Before I go to heaven." For several seconds, Charlie couldn't say a word. The sounds of 20,000 cheering fans seemed impossibly far away. He swallowed hard. "When did you find out?" Margaret answered instead. "Last winter. The doctors say—" She couldn't finish. Charlie gently placed his hand over hers. "You don't have to explain." When Charlie returned backstage, Elvis immediately looked at him. "Well?" Charlie didn't answer right away. He simply removed his glasses. His eyes were already wet. Elvis's expression changed instantly. "What happened?" Charlie spoke quietly. "The boy's dying." Silence. Only the orchestra could be heard through the curtain. Elvis slowly lowered his head. "How old?" 8. The answer hit him harder than Charlie expected. Elvis leaned against the wall. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Charlie added something else. "He told me he came tonight because he wanted to hear you sing before he goes to heaven." Elvis closed his eyes. He remembered being a little boy himself in Tupelo, remembered how poor his family had been, remembered losing his own twin brother before he ever had the chance to know him. Life could be painfully unfair, especially to children. He looked toward the stage entrance. The audience continued cheering, completely unaware of the conversation happening only a few feet away. Finally, Elvis spoke. "Bring them backstage after the show." Charlie hesitated. "I'm not sure he'll make it that long." Elvis slowly looked up. "What do you mean?" "He looks very weak. He struggled just sitting through one song." Those words settled heavily in the room. Back in the audience, Daniel leaned closer to his mother. "Mom?" "Yes?" "I'm getting tired." "I know. But I'm happy." Margaret smiled through tears. "I'm happy too." Daniel looked toward the bright stage lights. "I never thought I'd actually see him." His breathing became slower. Each breath seemed to require more effort. Margaret wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "You can lean on me." He rested his head against her. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. They simply listened. On stage, Elvis began, "Love Me Tender." The entire arena sang with him. Thousands of tiny voices became one. Daniel's lips moved softly. His voice had almost disappeared now, but he refused to stop singing. Margaret realized something that frightened her. Her son wasn't looking at Elvis anymore. His eyes were struggling to stay open. She gently shook him. "Daniel?" He smiled faintly. "I'm listening." "You don't have to stay awake." "I do." "Why?" "Because," he took another slow breath, "this is my favorite night." Halfway through the song, Elvis looked toward the wheelchair again. This time, Daniel wasn't sitting upright anymore. His head rested against his mother's shoulder. Margaret was trying desperately to hide her tears. Something was terribly wrong. Elvis missed his next lyric, only for a second. Most of the audience didn't notice. The band covered it perfectly. But Charlie did. So did the musicians who had performed beside Elvis for years. They knew that look. Elvis wasn't thinking about the song anymore. He was thinking about the child. As the applause erupted again, Elvis walked toward Charlie. Without speaking into the microphone, he whispered just 5 words. "I'm going down there now." Charlie's eyes widened. "Right now?" Elvis looked toward Daniel once more. Then he quietly answered, "Before it's too late." The audience had no idea that the next few minutes would become the most unforgettable moment of the entire concert, one that would be talked about long after the music faded and the lights went dark. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to hesitate. The applause had barely faded when Elvis stepped away from the microphone. The band members exchanged confused glances. His conductor looked at him, waiting for the next song. Instead, Elvis slowly raised one hand. The musicians immediately understood. Stop. Every instrument fell silent. The arena, which only moments earlier had echoed with music and cheers, became strangely quiet. 20,000 people watched as Elvis walked toward the very edge of the stage. No one knew why. Fans assumed he was about to hand out scarves. Others believed he was preparing to tell a joke, something he often did between songs. Instead, he knelt down. His eyes never left the little boy in the wheelchair. Security guards instinctively moved closer, unsure what was happening. Elvis looked at one of them. "Please," his voice was calm, "bring him up here." The guard blinked. "Yes, sir." Within seconds, 2 security officers carefully wheeled Daniel toward the side ramp leading onto the stage. The audience erupted into applause. Most thought the child had simply been chosen for a special moment. Only a handful of people knew the truth. Margaret walked beside her son, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold on to the wheelchair handles. She had no idea what to say, no idea what was about to happen. When Daniel reached the stage, Elvis walked down the final step himself instead of waiting for the wheelchair to come to him. He lowered himself onto one knee. The bright stage lights reflected in his eyes. For the first time that night, Daniel and Elvis were face to face. Neither of them spoke. For several seconds, they simply looked at one another. Daniel smiled first, a tiny, exhausted smile. "So," he whispered, "you really came?" Elvis smiled back. "I sure did." The audience laughed softly. The tension eased for a moment. Elvis gently reached out and held Daniel's small hand. It felt impossibly light, fragile, like the hand of someone who had already fought battles far beyond his years. "What is your name, son?" "Daniel." "Well, Daniel," Elvis said quietly, "I've been hearing you've been singing better than I have tonight." A ripple of laughter spread across the arena. Daniel giggled. "I don't think so." "Oh," Elvis grinned, "I heard otherwise." Margaret stood only a few feet away. She couldn't stop crying. Charlie Hodge quietly handed her a handkerchief. She whispered, "I don't know how to thank him." Charlie gently answered, "You don't have to." Elvis noticed the blue bandana covering Daniel's head. He noticed the dark circles beneath the boy's eyes. He noticed how difficult it seemed for him just to keep breathing. Everything Charlie had said was true, perhaps even worse. Elvis leaned a little closer. "So tell me, partner, what made you come all the way here tonight?" Daniel looked down for a moment, then back into Elvis's eyes. "I wanted," he paused, trying to catch his breath, "to hear you sing." Elvis squeezed his hand gently. "I'm glad you did." Daniel nodded. "So am I." Another long silence followed. No one inside Madison Square Garden made a sound. Not the musicians, not the photographers, not even the audience. It felt as though 20,000 strangers had become witnesses to something deeply personal. Elvis quietly asked, "Are you feeling all right?" Daniel smiled. "A little tired." His mother looked away. She knew he was much more than tired. But Daniel never wanted people worrying about him. That was simply who he was. Elvis looked toward Charlie. Charlie gave him the smallest nod. It confirmed everything. The doctors had done all they could. Time was running out. Elvis turned back toward Daniel. "You know, when I was your age, I used to get scared too." Daniel tilted his head. "You did?" "Oh, sure. I was scared of failing. I was scared of disappointing people. I was scared that nobody would ever hear me sing." Daniel listened carefully. Then he quietly replied, I'm not scared anymore." Those words caught Elvis completely off guard. What changed? Daniel looked toward the audience, toward the lights, toward the enormous arena that had suddenly become perfectly still. Then he looked back at Elvis. "My mom says that heaven is beautiful." Elvis nodded. "She sounds like a smart lady." Daniel smiled. "I think so." Another pause. Then Daniel took one slow breath and whispered 6 words that no one standing nearby would ever forget. "I'll hear you sing again there someday." Everything stopped. Elvis didn't move. The audience couldn't hear the words. Only those standing closest to the boy understood what had just been said. Charlie lowered his head. Margaret covered her mouth. One of the security guards quietly wiped his eyes. Elvis stared at Daniel. His lips trembled. For years, millions had seen Elvis command audiences with confidence. They had watched him joke effortlessly, smile endlessly, charm every room he entered. But in that moment, the king of rock and roll had no words. His eyes slowly filled with tears. He looked away for only a second, trying to compose himself. When he looked back, a single tear rolled down his cheek. There were no cameras close enough to capture it clearly, but those standing nearby never forgot it. Elvis cleared his throat. "You know something, Daniel?" "What?" "I think," he smiled through tears, "you're the brave one tonight." Daniel softly shook his head. "No, you are. Because you make people forget they're hurting." Elvis couldn't answer. He simply reached forward and gently embraced the little boy. The crowd, seeing only the hug, erupted into thunderous applause. They had no idea why. They only knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The applause continued for nearly a full minute. Neither Elvis nor Daniel moved. Finally, Elvis stood. He turned toward the band. He raised one finger. No orchestra. The musicians immediately lowered their instruments. Elvis looked toward his guitar technician. "Bring me the acoustic." Within moments, a simple acoustic guitar rested in his hands. No flashing lights, no dramatic introduction, no powerful arrangement. Just one man, one guitar, and one little boy. Elvis pulled a chair close to Daniel's wheelchair. He sat beside him instead of standing above him. Then he leaned toward the microphone. His voice was softer than anyone in the arena had ever heard. "This next song," he paused, swallowing hard, "is for my friend Daniel." Silence covered Madison Square Garden once more. Elvis gently placed his fingers on the strings. The first quiet chords echoed through the arena. It was "Peace in the Valley." Daniel closed his eyes the instant the melody began. A peaceful smile slowly appeared across his face. As Elvis sang the opening verse, many people in the audience instinctively reached for each other's hands. Some prayed, some cried openly, others simply listened. No one dared interrupt the moment. Halfway through the song, Elvis looked toward Daniel. The little boy was still smiling, but his breathing had become slower, much slower. And Elvis suddenly realized the song had become far more than a performance. It had become a farewell. The first gentle notes of "Peace in the Valley" drifted through Madison Square Garden like a quiet prayer. There was no cheering, no screaming fans, no flashing cameras, only the soft sound of Elvis's voice filling every corner of the arena. His hands moved slowly across the strings of the acoustic guitar. Every lyric seemed directed toward only one person, Daniel. The little boy sat perfectly still in his wheelchair. His eyes remained closed. His small hand rested inside Elvis's free hand. Margaret watched them through tears she could no longer hide. She had imagined countless endings for her son's journey: a hospital room, white walls, machines, doctors speaking in whispers. She had never imagined this: her son spending one of the last nights of his life beside the man whose music had carried him through years of pain. As Elvis reached the second verse, his voice cracked, only slightly, but everyone close enough noticed. Charlie Hodge looked away. The members of the TCB band lowered their heads. Many had performed hundreds of concerts with Elvis. They had seen him laugh. They had seen him angry. They had seen him exhausted. None of them had ever seen him sing like this. There was no performance anymore, only emotion, only truth. Near the middle of the song, Daniel slowly opened his eyes. He looked at Elvis with the same peaceful smile he had worn all evening. Elvis noticed. He smiled back. Without interrupting the song, he gently squeezed the boy's hand. Daniel squeezed back, very softly. Almost all of his strength was gone, yet somehow his smile became brighter. When the final verse arrived, the entire arena seemed to breathe together. There will be peace in the valley for me. Several voices quietly joined in, not because Elvis had asked them to, because the moment felt sacred. Thousands of strangers sang almost in whispers. No one wanted to overpower the fragile voice coming from the stage. It was one of the rare moments when 20,000 people understood that silence could be louder than applause. The last chord slowly faded. Elvis lowered the guitar. For several seconds, no one moved. Daniel looked up at him. "That," he whispered, "was beautiful." Elvis smiled. "So are you, son." Daniel gave a tiny laugh. Then he looked toward his mother. "I told you I'd get to hear him." Margaret nodded, unable to speak. She knelt beside the wheelchair and gently kissed her son's forehead. "I'm so proud of you." Elvis removed the silver cross that hung around his neck. It wasn't an expensive piece of jewelry. He had worn it for years. It had traveled with him across countless cities. He carefully placed it into Daniel's small hand. "I want you to keep this." Daniel stared at it. "I can't." "You can." "But it's yours." Elvis smiled. "It belongs to you now." Daniel looked at the cross for a long moment before wrapping his fingers around it. "I'll take good care of it." "I know you will." Before returning to the microphone, Elvis leaned closer to Daniel. "So tell me something." "What is it?" "When people ask what happened tonight, what should I tell them?" Daniel thought for a moment. Then he smiled. "Tell them that one song can make someone stop being afraid." Elvis closed his eyes. Those words settled deep inside him. He knew he would carry them for the rest of his life. Elvis stood and slowly faced the audience. The arena remained completely silent. He took a deep breath. "I've sung in a lot of places." He paused. "I've been blessed to stand in front of millions of people." Another pause. "But tonight," he looked back toward Daniel, "I think we all learned something." The audience listened without making a sound. "We spend a lot of time asking what music can do." He smiled softly. "Tonight, music didn't change the world. It simply reminded us how precious every moment is." He looked across the sea of faces. If you've got someone you love, don't wait until tomorrow to tell them. You never know how many tomorrows any of us have. Not a single person interrupted him. Some couples embraced. Parents held their children a little tighter. Complete strangers quietly wiped tears from their faces. The audience slowly rose to its feet. One person began clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, every single person inside Madison Square Garden was standing. The applause lasted longer than any song that night, nearly 5 full minutes. Not for Elvis, for Daniel. The little boy looked around the arena in amazement. "They're clapping for me." Elvis smiled. "They sure are." Daniel laughed softly. "I've never had 20,000 friends before." After the concert ended, Elvis canceled every interview scheduled for that evening. Instead, he asked for a private room backstage. Margaret wheeled Daniel inside. The room was quiet. No reporters, no photographers, no publicity. Just a tired little boy, his mother, Elvis, Charlie Hodge, and 2 members of the band. For nearly an hour they talked. Not about fame, not about music, about baseball, favorite foods, school, cartoons. Daniel even asked Elvis whether he ever became nervous before concerts. Elvis laughed. "Every single one." "You do?" "Oh, yes. I just try not to let anybody notice." Daniel grinned. "I noticed." Both of them laughed. Before leaving, Daniel reached into his jacket pocket. "I made something." He handed Elvis a folded piece of paper. Inside was a child's drawing. It showed a stage, a guitar, a little wheelchair, and 2 smiling figures holding hands beneath bright lights. Across the top, written in careful, uneven handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for making tonight the happiest night of my life." Elvis stared at the drawing for several moments. Then he carefully folded it again. "I'm keeping this forever." 3 weeks later, while preparing for another performance, Charlie quietly entered Elvis's dressing room carrying a letter. He didn't need to say anything. Elvis recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately. He opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. "Dear Elvis, Daniel passed away peacefully yesterday morning. He was holding your cross in one hand and the drawing of the concert in the other. His last words were, 'Tell Elvis, thank you for the song. You gave my son a memory that took away his fear. As a mother, I can never repay that kindness. Thank you for treating him like he mattered. With all my gratitude, Margaret Harper." The room fell silent. Elvis read the letter again, then a third time. Without speaking, he walked to his suitcase, removed Daniel's drawing, and placed it beside his Bible. He remained there for several minutes in quiet reflection. In the months that followed, members of Elvis's entourage noticed something different. Whenever he sang "Peace in the Valley," he would pause for just a brief moment before the first verse. Most audiences never understood why. Only Charlie knew. Only a handful of people backstage knew. Elvis wasn't preparing his voice. He was remembering a brave little boy who had taught him that courage isn't measured by strength, fame, or the number of years a person lives. It's measured by the love they leave behind. Years later, people would remember that concert for many reasons. Some remembered the music. Some remembered the standing ovation. Some remembered seeing Elvis kneel beside a child instead of standing above him. But those who were there never forgot the feeling that filled Madison Square Garden that night. For a few extraordinary moments, the world's biggest rock and roll star wasn't simply entertaining an audience, he was comforting a child. And in doing so, he reminded thousands of strangers that the greatest performances are not always measured by the loudest applause. Sometimes they are measured by a quiet song, a gentle smile, a small hand held with kindness, and 6 whispered words that echoed in one man's heart for the rest of his life. I'll hear you sing again there someday.